tonal drawing using pencil. Here's some resources you may need.
Hello, so today we're going to talk a little bit about how to create an observational drawing from your diorama. So you will have set up a still life in your diorama, and today we're going to draw from it. So for this lesson you're going to need a selection of different graded pencils. These pencils can be bought in many different retailers, high street shops, or online, and ideally you're going to need a selection of different grades. Okay, if you don't have that, it's absolutely fine just to use what you have, and then I can show you how to adjust your pressure to create a variable tone. Okay, so I have got a selection of pencils here. You're going to need to make sure they're nice and sharp, you've got a nice point on them, and for this task you'll also need an eraser at some point. I'm going to use A4 paper today, and I have that here ready. Okay, so to get started, what you need to do is you need to think about how much space you've actually got to use. So I've got my A4 sheet here, and my diorama, my still life setup is more wide than it is high, so I'm going to be working landscape. If your still life is higher than it is wide, then you might consider working portrait. So that's really down to you, which way you lay your paper. Okay, I'm going to get started. So I already know a little bit about tone, and I'm going to start with a light pencil. So a pencil such as a HB, I know is going to have a hard graphite, so it's going to create a light mark. And this is the pencil that I'm going to start with, to create my initial sketch. To get started, as I said earlier, you need to make sure you're considering all of the space on your page. So what I tend to do is look at what it is I'm drawing and look at what is in the centre of that. So I'm looking at my stainless steel watering can in the middle there, and I'm just going to start. And at this stage it doesn't have to be good, you're just planning, you're mapping out your page to make sure everything's going to fit in the space. Okay, so I'm just going to sketch out really lightly. Please do not worry about any mistakes at all. At this stage we're just sketching out, and then we can rub out anything we're not happy with. This is just to map out our still life and to make sure it's all going to fit on the page. It doesn't have to be perfect drawing, it's just to get an idea. Okay. What you need to make sure you're doing is looking at your still life 60% of the time and only looking at your paper 40% of the time. This way you're going to get a really good likeness of what you're drawing. You get a better idea of the proportion of the different objects in relation to each other, and you'll just get a better drawing overall. So make sure you're really looking so as not to make any mistakes with sizing or proportion. Okay, I'm just gonna make sure I'm getting my ellipses right as well, so all of the rounded objects that I've chosen, I need to make sure that the ellipses are right, so that's exactly as I see them. Okay, once you're happy with your initial sketch and you're happy with the proportion of your objects in relation to each other, you're happy with the size and the way that it fills the page, you can then start thinking about adding some tone. So to add tone, as you've previously learned, the higher the number on your pencil, the darker the mark. So what I tend to do, rather than jumping straight away to a 6B, I tend to add some tonal variation with like a 2B or a 3B first, just to get an idea of where that shade is. So we spoke a little bit last lesson about how to consider your light. Today I've got some light coming in through the window, which is hitting my diorama quite nicely. But if you'd like to cast a stronger shadow, then you might consider using an artificial light such as a torch or a lamp. But I'm happy with how my diorama looks today. If you know that you're going to be spending quite a considerable amount of time on your drawing, you might want to consider an artificial light, which you can then control. But today I'm going to do a fairly quick drawing just to show the tone, and let's get started on that. So what I'm doing is I'm looking to see where any shadows are cast, where any highlights are on the objects. I've chosen two objects which are stainless steel, so they've got some really nice tonal variation on them. So I'm just going to look at where those shadows fall, and then start building up tone that way. Okay, so anywhere that I've obviously chosen some vessels there, where I've got my vessels, I can see that they're very, very dark inside. There's a shadow cast inside. You can see where the shadows are cast on the walls of the diorama from your objects. So just make sure you're paying attention to all of that and try to capture that with your pencil. So the idea of adding shading beneath your objects as well, where they're sitting on the objects below, this is going to create a sense of weight as well. So our objects aren't going to look as though they're sort of floating. They'll look like they have a sense of weight. You can see that they are sitting on a surface. So I'm just going to start. And still making sure, even though you've already done your drawing, still make sure that you're really looking at those objects, just to make sure you can get the shapes and the forms right, and just make sure your drawing is accurate. Please don't feel the need to blend your pencil with your finger or smudge with your finger, because it shows more skill if you're able to adjust your tonal gradient just using your pencil rather than smudging it. Okay. If you leave marks, please don't worry about making it perfect either. Leaving marks is great. It's evidence that you were there, you were drawing. It doesn't have to be perfect. We're not looking for a photorealistic representation of your objects, so just focus on creating that tone and not being too afraid to leave marks, okay? Okay, when you get to this point where you're quite happy with how your tone is starting to look, what I want you to do is start to think about eradicating any lines. Okay, so quite often when people try to make a drawing, observational drawing, the first thing they do is they consider like the lines or the outline of the objects that they're drawing, but in actual fact objects do not have a line, they do not have an outline. What we're looking at is a series of highlights and shadows, and we're just focusing on that. And actually, if you leave any outlines to your objects that you've drawn, what you're going to do is you're going to make your drawing look very flat and very 2D. So to try and show, to get the effect of 3D forms, we need to make sure that we're actually just showing the shading, just showing the shadows, the highlights, and just blending out any lines that you may have drawn, or rubbing out any lines, because they just do not exist. Okay, so just make sure there's no lines and it is all based on shadow, all based on tonal differences on our objects. Okay, right, once you're happy with that, you can then start using a dark pencil. So I'm going to use a 6B pencil to create some darker areas, some darker shadows, and then you also might want to use a rubber to add highlights if you wanted to do that. So I'm going to look again at my objects. Anywhere that I've got some real dark shadows, I'm just going to press a bit harder. If you've only got one type of pencil, that's fine. You just need to adjust the pressure of your pencil to try and create those tonal differences. Okay, once you're happy, know when it's time to stop and to move on, but I'm quite happy with that. Why don't you have a go at creating your own tonal observational drawing from your diorama objects?